Am I a freelancer or am I an entrepreneur? It's a question for the ages. In fact, I hear it all the time in my coaching practice. It might be the number one question. Now, both are valuable, both are important, but if you don't know which camp you fall into, then you're not going to have the proper metrics for success. As freelancers, we do a job. As entrepreneurs, we figure out the job. A good example would be comparing a plumber to an architect. Now, when you're a plumber, aka a freelancer, then your job is to fix a toilet. You come to the house, you fix the toilet. The house could be going crazy, the house could be on fire, that's not your job. Your job is to fix the toilet and get paid to fix the toilet. That's it. When you're an architect, aka an entrepreneur, then you don't know where the toilet is. In fact, there is no toilet. Where does the toilet go? How many toilets are we going to have? How big is the bathroom going to be? Are we going to have a bidet instead? Those are all questions you need to ask, and that's actually your job. Your job is to figure out the parameters, the standard. Which leads to the next part. As freelancers, our job is to follow a particular standard. As entrepreneurs, our job is to create the actual standard. I've been a longtime freelance contributor to Playboy magazine way back when Hugh Hefner was still at the helm. Rest in peace to Hugh Hefner. But even though I ended up working with him and ended up being involved with the staff there, I was never asked, hey, who's the target audience for our magazine? How much advertising should we have? How many pictures should be in each issue? I was never asked that because my job was to meet and fulfill the culture that was already created by Hugh Hefner way back in the 1950s. Compare that to being an entrepreneur. When I co-founded the startup Cuddler, it was something that connected people for hugs. Kind of like Tinder or Grindr, some of the hookup apps, but strictly platonic and for hugs. One of the things that I had to do as the COO of it was to figure out what the actual standard was going to be. So how quickly will we respond to customer service? My decision was we would respond to everybody within 24 hours, which meant some pretty late nights, but that was part of our image. And it went down all the way to the font that we would use for the actual messaging, because we had to convey this idea of emotional safety if people are connecting for hugs. It's a very vulnerable place to be. So as founders, we actually had to create the standard. Another word for the standard is culture. As freelancers, our job is to maintain the culture created. As entrepreneurs, our job is to actually make and create the culture. That's a big difference. Also, as freelancers, we create a job for ourselves. As entrepreneurs, we create jobs for other people. Freelancer, we dig deep into our niche. We find our particular market, we dive into it and become an expert in that particular product or service. As an entrepreneur, we're actually building jobs and opportunities for other people. For instance, with the Bring Your Worst show, I ended up hiring Purple Fluorite to do the theme song that you're hearing in the background, as well as Neha Tawari of Virgin Consulting to come up with a trailer for the show. And one of the most important points as far as how you spend your time is that as freelancers, we trade time for money. As entrepreneurs, we trade time for investment. Now, as freelancers, we have different metrics for doing this. We could do build hours, we could get paid per project. Back when I was doing a lot more freelance journalism, then we would be paid per word. There's some type of metric. Now, we might have more flexibility than the traditional 9-to-5 job, but there's only so much of ourselves we can give. For instance, if back to the plumber analogy, how many toilets can you plumb at one time? We're going to call it a verb. I don't know if it is, but it's a verb now. How many toilets can you plumb at one time? Probably only one. So there's a certain restriction to that idea. It also means as freelancers that we get paid the same amount no matter what's happening with the people or organizations that we're working with. Now, I've worked with some publications or organizations that were literally going bankrupt right after I did the work with them. I've been in bankruptcy court. It is crazy, fighting for your money. And then I've been in situations where I've freelanced for an organization or a person, and then I became a billionaire, or in some cases a trillionaire, after the fact. Either way, I got the same plumber rate. As entrepreneurs, though, we trade time for investment. Most of the time, we're building something that we don't have that guarantee that it's actually going to financially pay off later on. Because of that risk and that higher risk, we get a chance of a higher reward. When my co-founders and I sold Cuddler a handful of years ago, we sold the company, we got a check, and then we split that check based on our ownership of the company. It also makes it easier to build passive income because more than likely you're actually going to own at least a part of that intellectual property that you're building, unlike being a freelancer. So which one is better? Neither. Or both. I'll tell a lot of my coaching clients that if they're heavy into the freelancing, why don't you try to get some ownership going as an entrepreneur? And if they're hardcore entrepreneurs, I'll recommend that they get a little bit of freelance going. I actually follow the same formula, which has got my career to where it is now. I do freelancing, and I have always done freelancing because it gives steady or more steady income. And it doesn't require me to put on the leadership role all the time and figure out what the culture is going to be. And then I do the entrepreneurship because it allows me to make a bigger cultural impact, allows me to build in ownership as well as passive income, and allows me to impact things in a way that I wouldn't be able to do as a freelancer. So what about you? What camp do you fall into, or are you like me where you're a blend of both? Be sure and drop a line or leave a note. And if you want more info on becoming a better freelancer, if you're an entrepreneur, or a better entrepreneur if you're a freelancer, be sure and go to the show notes. I need to quit. In fact, that's probably the number one question that I get with my coaching clients who are having a challenging time with their job, not their career, but with their job. And they see that their career is going in a direction that they don't want to go, and or they don't know what's next for them, but they know that this job is not it. Yeah, tough place. Also misalignment between your values and the organization. That makes perfect sense. And that goes back to what we were just talking about for sure. When do I know it's time to quit? You gotta know when to get out for sure. I appreciate that comment. Yeah, exactly. And so as far as what you need to quit, for me, it's come down to two basic things. A lot of complicated discussions and situations and all those things, but I think it comes down to two basic ideas. What you need to quit. Number one, you need a vision, and number two, you need a runway. You need a vision and you need a runway. Vision is, what exactly am I going to do? Let's say I get my wish granted, and right today it's Thursday. So Thursday, 4:59 p.m. It's like, all right, packing up my stuff, or if it's virtual, saying bye to all my coworkers and whatever, making sure I get a good reference from the people that I worked with, and then that's it. What are you going to do? You need to have some type of plan, not even plan, strategy. I talked about this in some previous episodes. You need a strategy in place. I'm going to do this kind of hustle, and this hustle as well, and this hustle as well. And these three things will get close to the income that I got from this job that I really didn't like. Or my vision is to pare down things and do such and such so that I can actually afford to figure out what my next move is going to be. You need some type of vision, some type of strategy, please, before you quit. One of the reasons that I got involved in actually starting a YouTube channel and starting the Bring Your Worth TV show is that there were a lot of people that were online who were encouraging people before the pandemic to actually quit their jobs without having a plan in place. And as a business coach for several years, and even in my own experiences, and my wife can attest, so many different ups and downs and so forth, it's like, no, that's not the message that needs to be put out here. Yes, your job might be in a really rough place, and you might be ready to move on, but that doesn't mean that the next step in the staircase of your career is built. You need to work on it. You can't just say, I'm done with it, and then just be at home watching soap operas. Like, no, particularly in this day and age, there's way too much competition, frankly, if you're going after a traditional job or even a corporate job, way too much competition, way too many people who are frankly hungry, in some cases literally, to have those positions. So you have to be really careful as far as where you're moving on to. So as far as what you need to quit, number one is having some type of vision. Something. Get a strategy. Take your best friend to lunch, and then y'all can talk over some tacos or something. Do something. Figure it out. Even hire a coach like myself or somebody else. Figure it out. You need to map some type of. The second thing you need, maybe even more important, is a runway. A runway is important. Runway is the same thing that you think about with a plane. You know how a plane doesn't just lift off like a helicopter, it needs a runway. And depending on the size of the plane, the amount of passengers, gas, all this, I think that'll be calculus that's used to figure that out. They're able to establish, it needs X amount of feet, or it needs a half a mile to take off. They have it down to a science. Y'all engineers in the audience know what I'm talking about. You need the same thing before you decide to leave your position. Now, runway actually came from where I'm from with Silicon Valley and startups. And so when people say there's a runway for a startup or a business, that's the amount of cash that's available, resources, let's just call it cash, and how long it will be able to sustain itself based on that cash. So if your monthly budget is $2,000 a month, and while you're working at your job that you just quit, you were able to put away around $10,000 for that. That means you have 5 months for runway, right? There's $2,000 a month, which they call it the monthly nut, as they used to call it. $2,000 a month. That goes to 5 months. That equals $10,000. That's your runway. You need to know what your runway is. If your runway is a year, is your runway a week? What is your runway? You need to figure out what the deal is with that, because you can't be making these bigger decisions, especially drastic decisions, intense decisions, without knowing what your vision is as far as what you're going to do next and what your runway is, which is so important to it. So the question I get a lot of, Coach, about a 5 or 700, 5 or 600. I promise I'm not making these numbers up. 5 to 600 of y'all as a business coach, helping you level up your business, start your side hustles. We'll talk about that briefly too, and all those things. That's one of the biggest questions that I've gotten over the years is, how do I do my career pivot? Where does it start? If you're pivoting your career, it starts with first figuring out what you bring to the table, what makes you special. For me, I can listen to people talk all day. So I'm a strong listener. I do something called active listening, where someone will listen and then I'll respond based on whatever they were saying. And then that makes it clear to them, so it's called active or empathetic listening, depending on which school of thought you go through. I'm also fairly articulate as far as even my more complex or confusing emotions. I'm able to put them into words, which not everyone can do. Even when I'm overwhelmed, I'm able to articulate that. That's a strength. That's what people will call like a superpower. I know what those are. And so because I know what those are, then I can figure out how that would apply to whatever career is next for me. So it ends up being these core things. One of the things I talked about a lot, particularly when I did the book Career Remix about 3 or 4 years ago, it was 2022, so it's 3 years ago. Time flies. But in 2022, I did Career Remix. And the big slogan for that, which came from my coaching practice, is the job is theirs, but the career is ours. In other words, you can get fired from your job, like from an angry supervisor. You can get, knocked out and laid off because of a merger or because of corporate cuts. Again, shout out to my folks that are federal government employees that are feeling the pain right now. Those things can happen, but the skill sets that you have either innately, like you naturally have them. Like I naturally love telling stories. I naturally love hearing stories. I've always been like that. Luckily, all my parents are still around. They've said I've been like that since I was a toddler. So that's something that's innate. You have those things that a job can give you, like pay, obviously, benefits, 401k, all those things, that all the great trappings that come with a traditional job, particularly a full-time job. Those are blessings. But you're still taking your skill set with you. And in fact, if you're in an environment and you have the mindset of a learner, then whatever you get on that job, you're going to take it with you. Way back in the day, talking when I was a teenager, and I became a newspaper reporter. So my background is journalism. And me learning, working in the ad department,
Me working with artists and even doing some art myself, all those things. Even though I didn't go towards advertising and other things, I went in a different direction, those skills still came with me. You still have your toolbox. So figuring out what you bring to the table as far as what your particular toolbox is. And then I think this important part is recognizing the part of you that's not utilized. So what's being underutilized right now? So if you're in a very fixed role in your career and you're like, okay, this is my identity. Let's say you're an ad manager. It's like, okay, so you're a salesperson. Bottom line, you're a salesperson. All you do is sales. You might not be working in the creative. The creative would be the people that are actually designing the ads or doing the copy for the ads, the text, whether it's spoken or written down, like those other details. And you might be a really good writer, but since you're the ad manager, the main thing you're doing is sales. So sometimes when we have a particular job and we have a title, we assume that's the breadth or the width of the things that we can do. If you're looking to do a career pivot, you really have to shift from what the job title says to that toolbox that you have that shows what you're capable of. Once you do that, you can say, oh, I'm actually a decent artist, or I'm pretty good with words. So then whatever you do next in your career, whether it's within that organization or outside of that organization, then it might be something related to words. So understanding what you bring to the table, and then separating those parts of you that are highlight, whatever the past tense is, in that job title that you've had maybe for a long time, and then recognizing those skills that you still have that are actually dormant. That's one of the strongest ways you can make a career pivot, because you can recognize those parts of it. When I made a career pivot, I think it was around a time that my first son was born, and he's about to turn 12, so it's probably just over a decade ago. And I remember talking to my partner at the time and saying, hey, this journalism I've been doing, I don't think it's going to get us to where we want to be, financially or otherwise. And of course, now it's easy to say that in 2025, as we're talking right now, it's like, oh, of course, media is in a rough place. But we're going back, a dozen years ago. And there were still magazines on the stands that were doing okay. And newspapers were still thriving. And they weren't just owned by billionaires who had questionable motives. There weren't things that were like shifting elections and things like that. There's a little bit more of a clarity as far as separation of church and state, for lack of a better term, with the newspaper business. So that was a tough decision, especially to say that, say that to my partner at the time, while we have a little kid, a little boy at home, a baby at the time. And it's like, hey, I'm realizing journalism isn't going to make it. Isn't going to get us to where we want, financially or otherwise. There wasn't anything wrong with journalism per se. I have 2 degrees in journalism. I've been a journalist for a couple of decades at that point, maybe a little bit less, but I've been a journalist since I was a teenager. The pivot came, though, when I recognized that the path that journalism was going on wasn't for me anymore. And then that's when the startup started. That's when, shortly after, it was the TED Talks, and that eventually led to the best-selling books, the coaching practice, selling my startup Cuddler around the time that my son was 2, and led me to hanging out with y'all. But that was a conscious pivot. And so if you're not in a situation where you have to pivot, I would still encourage you to think about it from an analytical standpoint and be like, what are those parts of me that I bring to the table? And what are the parts of me that aren't being utilized right now and frankly might be undervalued? That's always a good practice. Again, I didn't have a gun to my head. No one was saying, hey, journalism might not be the thing for you. You've been doing it for a very long time. No, that was a conscious process to say, okay, where I want myself, my family, and my legacy to be, my period of time of journalism, I think it's starting to wane. I think it's starting to sunset. What else is out there? And then within a couple of years, it was Cuddler, cover the Wall Street Journal, end up selling that startup, and then this whole new career that leads me to hanging out with y'all today. And so don't be afraid of that process to pivot, particularly if you don't have to. If we're talking about pivoting, we got to talk about my homie, Jenny Blake. Shout out to Jenny, another career coach. Jenny Blake's pivot, the only move that matters is your next one. See, I'm trying to read backwards. I know it by heart. You see his dog here, Jim. I had like one of the first editions of the book signed. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. Jenny Blake is fantastic. Shout out to Jenny. You can learn more about her. I believe it's at jennyblake.com. You can just do a quick Google search. I've linked to all of her books or her main book right here. Fantastic book. It goes step by step as far as how to pivot to the next stage of your career. I think it came out in 2000. I think it came out shortly after I sold Cutler. So it came out like a decade ago. I still refer darn near all my clients to it, particularly if they're trying to figure out where they're going to move to next. Fantastic book. And it's step by step. She's super analytical with it, which is a blessing. And so you can just follow the steps in this and you'll be in excellent shape. So check her out. Also, again, she's a career coach. So if you're looking for that deeper stuff, if you're trying to pivot more in a corporate fashion, which is more her energy, mine is more the independent folks, hers is more corporate, she's one to look up. And then this is really my jam. 5 secrets to change and transition. Change and transition are not the same thing. Shout out to all my mentors and my family members who have told me as such. Such an important episode, such an important discussion. If you're going through change and transition, you have to take care of your external stuff, the logical part as far as the change, which is the change. And then transition is the internal stuff. How are you accepting it? What emotional needs do you need supported? What are you going to lose in this transition? 2 separate things. We talk about in depth in this live show. I want to say it's about an hour and a half, but it's one of my favorite episodes that we've ever done. Be sure and check it out if particularly you're going through some challenges and pain with the recent stuff going on. What about you? Are you going through a career pivot? Is something that you decided on your own, or is it kind of an outside influence? Love to hear in the comments. And perhaps myself or another one of the viewers or listeners can support. So jump in there. Yeah. What do you think you need as far as to pivot your career? Is this something that you just feel like it's time to do? Or some outside influence that's bringing some urgency? We'd love to hear.